I'm Felix Levine, and welcome to Unlike Me, where I sit down with fascinating people I have nothing in common with. And we're live. I'm super excited to get into this. I'm literally devoting an entire episode to everything with regards to OCD, what my experience has been like, how I've kind of maneuvered romantic life with OCD, familial life, friends, professional. I hope that, if you are listening or watching and either you have OCD or you have friends that do, I hope it provides some clarity or some comfort. I think for me, this is definitely new. I've talked about it sporadically, but never devoted an entire episode to it. And the reason that I wanted to take today to actually do a proper episode on it is because I think this summer I started to realize the impact that it can have on the people around you in ways that you might not really know or measure, especially if you're the person that has the OCD. So I really want to dive into that and give it the due time. So first of all, I have some little notes when it comes to some statistics that I think that honestly very interesting that I didn't expect, but hopefully gives a little bit of context to what obsessive compulsive disorder is. OCD affects approximately 1% of the global population, which translates to about 70 million people worldwide, which for me I thought is a little bit lower than I anticipated. In the United States, about 1.2% of adults have OCD, equating to over 3 million people. And 1 in 100 children have OCD, which is around 500,000 children and teens in the U.S. In terms of when you usually get your OCD, or you get your OCD, it sounds like vaccination. But usually it's kids between 8 and 12 and then early adulthood. So I guess the first question that comes to mind is, why am I sharing? Why am I taking an entire episode to talk about this? The reality is I think it's something that as I said a second ago, never really measured the weight of what it did to me, how it affects me on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes because something is part of your everyday, you don't realize that it's actually like a real thing that's taking time away from potentially your efficiency, your productivity, your romantic life, your ability to relax. And so, this summer with Serena, my girlfriend, we had a lot of conversations about it, because I think that especially when it comes to travel, where I am extremely more so on edge about the germophobia and the cleanliness. Oh, by the way, I should probably start with the big overarching theme of my personal OCD is all around, touching, cleanliness, feeling clean. Some might call this a germaphobe. So I want to give a little bit of context there as to really like 99% of what my OCD is about is around those themes. So going back to what I was saying, this summer when we were traveling around with Serena, obviously during the travels on the planes, trains, cars, all of the above is when I'm kind of at the highest levels of exhibiting my OCD symptoms, for lack of a better word. And I didn't realize kind of the toll that it could take on her. I always thought that OCD was a me thing, right? And so if I'm the one who has to clean my hands 5 times in a row or wash them or use like a hand sanitizing wipe, it's not affecting somebody else. And that's wrong. Why it's wrong is because me being on edge about my OCD tendencies is naturally going to put my partner on edge if she's with me, right? And also there's other small things like the sequence of events that I'm going to be touching something and how that's going to play onto my partner, right? Like If, for example, I need to get a wipe before I touch my passport and then before I touch my suitcase, then that might take a certain amount of time. And, Serena has to then wait for me to do those things. And maybe we're in a line and it stresses her out. And maybe I'm able to do it quickly because I know how to do it. But it's just like added moments that can cause stress and anxiety, and not just for me, but for my romantic partner. So a lot of these conversations, we had a lot of them this summer because um, I think I was exhibiting more symptoms than usual. What I've noticed is the times that I generally do showcase a lot more of the OCD tendencies are during times of stress. So that can be when you're traveling or when you're in a crowded place and you need to move quickly, but you have to do XYZ thing to feel comfortable in your head. That can be stress inducing both for yourself and also for the people that you're with. I think I should, even before I continue further, give a little bit of history as to what OCD looks like for me. As you guys know, OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. And throughout my life, I think that it has changed and morphed, and I've addressed it at sometimes more often than others. But I know it looks very different for different people. I have friends that have it. We talk about it all the time, and sometimes they'll tell me things that I don't care about. Not that I don't care. I don't care about the things, but like they'll tell me that they're obsessive about what order they have to put their clothes in. That's something that doesn't work. That I don't think or care for. Same thing, like when I'm washing my hands, they don't care about how their hands feel or washing their hands, right? So everybody that has OCD kind of puts weight into different things and has different obsessions. The first time that I can recall ever thinking that something was going on, I think my earliest memory was when I was like 6 or 7 and I was walking to school, and on the crosswalks, how, especially in New York City, there's, it kind of goes like these like checkered or like rows of white. I was only stepping on the white, so it would be like a strip of white, concrete, strip of white, concrete, like, you know what I'm talking about. And so I would only like step on the white. And if I didn't, like, I'd be like, I got to really step on the next white. And I think like, reflecting back on that, you could start to think that you're developing some kind of tics, right? Or you're paying attention to things that you can objectively know don't matter, but for some reason they matter to you, I think would be like a nice way of putting it. That, I think, started to kind of snowball into a lot of like being hyper aware of how I felt when it came to touching things. And for me, a lot of my OCD is rooted in how I feel, right? Like right now, before I started this, I had like a hand sanitizing wipe so my hands feel nice and clean. I can touch my phone, I can touch my pants, I can touch my shirt, right? And I feel good. I feel ready to do this podcast. But growing up, it was that, but it was like on another level. Like if I sat down in a place and then I felt some type of way about that place, let's take the subway for example, and then I came home, like I would have to immediately strip out of my clothes before I even like touched anything at home. Now, some people could be like, well, yeah, I mean, Subway's kind of nasty, right? And like, I would agree, obviously. Shocker, germaphobe agrees that Subway is nasty. But I did it on a level where it was like, dude, relax, right? Like if somebody was watching me do it, they'd be like, all right, it's not that bad, right? Like you can walk upstairs and like change your clothes upstairs. Why do you have to like do this immediately? I think where it then started to get way worse was, I have divorced parents, so I would go back and forth between their houses or apartments growing up. And so you know, there were certain clothes that I had to have at certain of their places. There were certain clothes that like I didn't take from my mom's house to my dad's or my dad's house to my mom's. There were certain sequences of events that like I had to do before I did something when it came to uh, my living spaces, which was my mom's and my dad's. Um, like if I needed to grab a specific folder that was at my mom's, even though I didn't need the folder for school the next day, I just felt better having it. So I'd go to my mom's first and then my dad's and then school, or vice versa. Or, if I had, or I would create time in the morning sometimes to go from my dad's to my mom's to school, because maybe that day, for whatever reason, I needed a certain, thing at my mom's, or I needed specific clothes that were there, and vice versa. So there was just a lot of like, you know, things clearly, as you can tell, going on in my head. And like, I don't have to dive into every single one of them, but even like when I would arrive at, and I'm just using, these two instances to showcase a little bit more of what it looked like. Like if I entered into one of their two apartments, I would do certain things with regards to like cleaning my phone, right? Like, and I had to do it a certain amount of times. Like I would take like a wet washcloth and like kind of clean certain crevices right as I entered into their apartments 33 times, right? Now someone's like, why 33 and why are you cleaning your phone? It just made sense to me. And that's kind of the weird thing when I'm describing OCD. And I think that people who don't have it, they're like, but like, why? And for someone who I think is fairly rational like me, it's something that just defeats you in that sense where you don't have an answer. Like, I cannot tell you why I did that. Do I think that, through therapy, and I'll talk about that after, there are certain reasons why I did that are linked probably to my childhood and, you know, people, places, and things that set off different behaviors? Yes. But overall, OCD is extremely irrational. It's almost like you're rationalizing irrationality, would be another way of putting it. So it's very interesting in that sense. During high school was definitely probably one of the harder times. I played competitive tennis my entire time during middle school and high school, but high school was very intense because I played 4 to 5 times a week, and I was, living in Brooklyn at home and commuting to the city, Upper West Side for school, or Midtown, and then going to Randall's Island to play a couple times a week. So I would get home sometimes at like 11:30, 12, and then and I was exhausted, mind you, and then I had all of these little things that I needed to do, right, that I kind of described earlier. And that's really where I think I actually genuinely suffered a lot, is because I probably would not be able to sleep if I just didn't do those things. And those things took time. And when you're already exhausted and it's late and you have to get up the next day to do more of those things, more of those OCD behaviors and tendencies, it's completely exhausting altogether, right? Not to mention you have homework to do, you have to shower, you have to do like all the quote unquote regular person things. And you want to have some time to text your friends or whatever it might be. So, to have an extra thing to think about at all times is exhausting. I remember a lot of my OCD would kind of force me, for lack of a better word, because I knew how long it would take me in the morning to get up earlier. So let's say that I was already going to sleep a little bit later at 11:30, 12 on some nights, and having to wake up sometimes 5:30, 6 when you're already, depleted because of tennis and school and whatever, and to immediately get into these, tendencies and things you need to do to get ready for school to feel okay, over time they wear on you. And I think that as a child or as a preteen, teen, and young adult, it's hard. And I think like in those moments, I never pitied myself or felt bad for myself. But looking back on it now, like it is hard. It is hard because you spend a third of your life sleeping, and especially growing up, you spend basically another third of your life in school, 8 hours a day. Um, so between 8 hours of school and 8 hours of sleeping, well, I guess if you're lucky, um, it kind of leaves you not that much other time for the rest of your life. And, I think a couple hours a day were, unfortunately, if you accumulate all the time spent, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, doing the little OCD things, it adds up, right? And it kind of sucks time and energy out of your life. Now, I want to preface saying all of these things like, I never approached it like this. In a kind of like Delulu twisted way, I would try to act like it was like a gift. Uh, Maybe because ego got in the way, or maybe I was in denial. But like, I told myself like, well, you're a perfectionist and this is what perfectionists do. And, you know, because you're put through the ringer every day with this OCD, like you'll be able to figure everything out in life. And maybe parts of it are true. I think there's other ways to go to be a perfectionist, and there's other ways to figure things out in life than having OCD. But yeah, maybe it did help me kind of grow a thicker skin and manage a lot of things at once, but it was definitely draining. When I went to college, it was more of the same. My freshman year of college, I've talked about this on a lot of other podcasts before, but I was probably just depressed, like, period. I can joke about it now, but in the moment, it's not super fun. I want to also preface all of this by saying I had an excellent childhood, and very lucky. I got to go to, great schools, public schools in New York City, and I was lucky enough to play tennis. I had great friends. I was social. Like, I had a very good life. But when you're alone and you're on edge, and your OCD is like coming out a lot, like it's, it does things to you. But I never took the victim mentality, and I still don't, because it's more like I have this thing and I'll deal with it. But just to kind of finish or go in a chronological sense, in college, it was more of the same. My freshman year, when I was kind of depressed, I think it was heightened even more because, again, what I've observed is the more anxious or depressed or kind of harder moments in life, the more the OCD kind of, for lack of a better word, flares up. And so, especially living in a nasty freshman dorm and, like shared showers are pretty bad for a germaphobe, and especially boys, and it's, they're nasty. So it definitely kind of made me feel like shit. When I then transferred over to Boston University, then there was COVID. Now, COVID was definitely an interesting one because it almost enabled my OCD to just continue. And what I mean by that is like, all of a sudden, me being a germaphobe and doing all these weird things with like my hand sanitizing wipes, and because I have an unlimited stash of wet ones at home or in my car at all times, all of a sudden, like, everyone in the world is wiping things down before they sit on them or touching them. Everyone in the world has hand sanitizing wipes in their back pocket, right? And so I was almost like, I told you motherfuckers, like, I was years ahead on the trend. And I can joke about it now, but I think, quite frankly, it probably made it worse because now when I whipped out my hand sanitizing wipes more freely and more often, people didn't even, blink. They were like, oh yeah, COVID, like, wipe down, And it, in a weird way, it was comforting, but in a weird way, I knew that it wasn't like going to improve anything for me. And really during all of COVID, like, I was just operating as normal. Like, I don't think it got worse in terms of like I was, quote unquote, having those flare ups, but it just kind of really allowed me to continue doing what I was doing, which, and not addressing it in any form of therapy. Fast forward to, I think it was maybe my senior year of college when I started to go to therapy really for the first time in my life, and bring it up with my therapist. And we started doing CBT therapy, which I believe is cognitive behavioral therapy. Let me just quickly double check that. Um, but that really helped me because it was, in a lot of ways, kind of like exposure therapy for me. And that was the type of therapy that I think I really needed, especially at that time. To confirm, CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. Here's how it would work with my therapist when we did some of the CBT uh, techniques, and really what like I explain as exposure therapy, maybe professionals do as well. But she would have me rank from 1 to 10 things that bothered me and things that didn't. So a 1 were things that didn't bother me. So like, you know, standing outside and breathing in quote unquote dirty air didn't really bother me. A 10 that bothered me on a level that I was unmanageable would be like to touch the subway floor, right? Which honestly should probably bother a lot of people, but neither here nor there. But no, I would give her other examples as well, like touching certain doorknobs that bothered me, or, I mean, I could go down the laundry list, but I would basically tell her different things and put ratings associated to them. And I remember in the beginning, she would have me do the things that were a 2 or a 3, right? So, for example, maybe it was like after grocery shopping and putting my groceries in the fridge, could I then touch my phone? And maybe that was like a 3 or a 4. So, she would try to start me out with things that were like manageable in that, let's say, 2 to 4 range that I could do. And I remember that was an example of what I did, right? Like I put something in my fridge, and usually I would wash my hands before I touch my phone, but then I touch my phone and immediately it's extremely uncomfortable, right? Like you just don't know what to do. You're kind of like standing still, being like, this feels weird. I'm also an objective, or I can be an objective person. So I'm like, Felix, like this is fine. But then there's this other voice in your head that's like, you need to go wash your hands right now. And, that's kind of like another really good way to put OCD is like, there's like Felix completely separated from how he feels, the objective person that knows that touching this or that doesn't do anything in the grand scheme. It doesn't affect your luck at getting a job. It doesn't affect the potential for you to meet somebody. Like nothing about what you're about to do is rational, and there's a part of me and a voice in my head that tells me that. Then there's the other part of me, which is like me, that like I could not for years put something in the fridge, not wash my hands and touch my phone and go into bed after and like be okay scrolling on Instagram knowing that I didn't wash my hands. Like it would just bother me too much. I'd have to get up. I'd have to wash my hands. So long-winded way of saying that it really was a very interesting process, a very uncomfortable process. Eventually those 2s, 3s, and 4s graduated to 5s, 6s, and 7s. And so over time, each week in therapy, we'd kind of go back and I would report back how I tried that week to do a 4, and how, the following week, how it went when I did a 6. Excuse me. And when I then got to the higher numbers, there was a lot of fear and anxiety around it, and like hesitancy. Like I didn't want to do it. I'm like, well, I don't care. Like I don't want to do that. Like I don't want to touch the rail of, this staircase and then touch my car, but I tried, and sometimes trying is actually pretty good. Like even in the past, I would have never touched that rail. But even if I didn't touch my car after, I still did something more than I had done before. And so I think what that mindset at least did, and by the way, I never got to the 9s and the 10s with her, or ever, by the way. But what it did do is that there are now things today that I do that I would not have done before. for example, even in my desk here in the studio, like 5 years ago, I would have probably had to wash down my desk every single day with wipes and like do things a certain amount of times before I get in here. Now I get in here and I just get on my computer. And like, to some people that sounds crazy, right? You're like, dude, what? But to me, like, that's a win. And you know, I've learned to live with it, right? Like I every day it's something that you're kind of battling, because it's part of your every movement, you know. But I've been able to deal with it. And I think like in the next part of like really going into how you can deal with it when it comes to, or how you should approach it with your romantic partners. I remember with Serena, it was one of the first things that we talked about early on. I mean, you know, I'm pretty good at hiding it from people I don't spend a lot of time with. And when I say hiding, I mean just like not making it a thing. But obviously with your girlfriend, like it's going to be a thing. Like if I'm getting up to wash my hands like 5 times in an hour, like it's a thing. And it's going to be noticed. So I told her very early on, and quite frankly, I've never really had shame about having OCD. I mean, there's times where I notice people are like looking at me and like I just address it. But it was one of those things that she was super supportive in, and like, you know, there was no judgments. It was more like, how can I make you feel comfortable, which, you know, shows who she is as a person, and wanting to always be loving and supportive. But you know, it's one of those things that over time you realize like, yes, she can want to kind of do what's going to make you comfortable, but you as a partner, as in me, I'm now at that point where I think I really need to almost match her level of efforts when it comes to improving my OCD. You know, she's done everything that she can to make my life easier when it comes to it. And I think as I get older and in the future have kids and all of that, right? Like really have to do the work to make sure that my behaviors don't, you know, have worse effects than you would ever intend on a partner and on kids. And so now even in therapy, you know, I'm able to talk about it more. The last 3 to 4 months, I've been using BetterHelp. I've been working with them on the podcast, as you guys have probably heard, but within that, it's been amazing because I get to use their product every week for the last 3 to 4 months. And with my therapist, I specifically selected a therapist that had I don't know if it's a training or degree, whatever it might be, a specialty in OCD. And it's just so helpful to be able to talk with an objective third-party professional on what it is that is going on, right? Like to be able to talk to him about where I'm at with my OCD and what it looked like when I was younger and what it looks like now and why it might have changed and how I can continue to improve it. Like these are all things that are so helpful. And I think if you care about your partner, you're going to do the work to improve it. This also goes for if there's a family member that is around you that has OCD or a friend, sometimes it's hard to have those conversations with them or for them to have those conversations with you because they don't understand exactly what it is you're going through. And even when you explain it, they come up with rational ways to improve or to help you because they want to help you. But sometimes the hard part is that rationality sometimes generally does not solve whatever it is you do. The more that I explain myself, the better it feels for me, the more my partner understands me, the more we can have an open dialogue, and the more I can even work on maybe a year from now, if I'm doing the work of knowing that second hand wash was unnecessary for XYZ reason, because the reasons I'm giving myself are strictly in my head and aren't real. Like, there's nothing dirty about touching this table after I wash my hands. Why do I have to wash my hands again? The more I think about it, the more I expose myself or do that quote unquote exposure therapy, the more improvements there are. I don't know if all that made sense, but that's really, I think, if you are a supporting cast member to someone who's dealing every day with OCD, something that I think has really helped me and helped my partner as well. The other thing is, I know this whole episode I've been talking about like the germaphobe side and touching and washing hands. Like, I have friends that have obsessive thoughts, which is obviously a very popular type of OCD, where they have to, if they're thinking about something, like they have to do something where they can't get certain thoughts out of their heads or whatever it might be. Some of those friends have taken medication for it. I have never. Maybe this is just like I'm being too, anti, like I don't want to be medicated. I don't know, right? Like, would I be open to trying it in the future? 100%. I just think right now where I'm at in life, like I'm a little bit afraid of some of the side effects. And like, sometimes the funny part is like people, and I'm guilty of this probably right now too. You only make changes when it's like a really big problem, right? Like if my OCD was crippling me to the point where I couldn't work and I couldn't be effective or productive, then I'd probably like go and take a medication. But because I can still be effective and I'm almost like quote unquote like functioning OCD member, if that's how, like I don't take the medication. And I think that that's probably not a smart thing. Something that I actually wanted to bring up with my therapist, and I will bring up with my therapist, and you guys can hold me to it. But yeah, it's as you can tell, it's kind of like this ongoing conversation, and I don't want to say battle, because I think one thing that I've noticed is I don't want to, and I said this earlier on this episode and I didn't really elaborate. I never victimized myself because I didn't want to. Maybe it was denial. I didn't want to put a label that would be like, I am suffering. And maybe it's because, as I said, it was denial and I didn't want to kind of give life to the fact that I could be suffering, which I think is probably fairly likely. I think the other part is like, I think my approach always, which I don't think is necessarily right, was we all have shit and we all have to deal with our shit. Saying it out loud, you realize like, yeah, it's true. It's definitely true. We all have our shit and we all have our demons and we all have our issues. But does that mean that you don't address this one more? Probably something for me to think about, and I know that, for other people, they feel more like on the day-to-day they suffer from it. And quite frankly, maybe ego's in the way of it too, where I don't let myself say that I'm suffering from it. But of course, like, as you can probably hear, like there has been suffering from it, whether it's just me, whether it's, sometimes affecting the people around me. So the last thing I want to talk about, I kind of battled with this with my parents in different ways over the years. Both, I think, obviously noticed, and of course want to always help me. And I think their approaches were both different. My dad has OCD, whether it's actually diagnosed or not, I'm not sure. But like, a lot of some of the similar tendencies, not necessarily with like the cleanliness, but other things. There's never questions on like it's almost like he gets it because he lives it too, in different ways. I think with my mom, who's such a loving and caring and supportive person, I think, and especially someone who always wants to, I mean, both parents are like this, but she's always someone who wants to see me as happy as possible. And so when you see something like OCD that could hinder your child's happiness, it's normal that you're trying to problem solve and find a solution, right? And especially when I'm a teenager or a young adult, when your mom is telling you that you have any problem of any sort, you don't want to listen, right? You're combative. And there's also, I think to be fair to myself, like when someone is telling you they have a solution, but they also don't have OCD, so they don't know your experience, you can kind of like shell up really quickly and be combative, like I said, and defensive and confrontational. And so I think like I did that a lot growing up, and even sometimes now, right? Like you can it's hard sometimes to want to listen to people who don't have the same experience as you. And sometimes maybe it's justified, other times it's not. But I think my best recommendation for parents when they have kids that have it, especially when they're younger or adolescent life, is just kind of be a listening ear. And I think both my parents did that really well. And as I went into therapy, me setting that boundary of like, hey guys, I'm working on this in therapy. I don't need your advices or your opinions or whatever. Like I have a therapist, and they gave me that room, right? Like they didn't question it. Sure, at times where they're like, hey, like how's it going? And I'd maybe give them like small, short answers. All good. That's also probably my personality at the time, and like not really still feeling comfortable to talk about it. But I think they did a really good job of like allowing me to feel comfortable to not always have to share it with them, as long as I was sharing it with someone. And that lesson probably rings true for a lot of things in life, but I think definitely when it came to my OCD, it was something that really helped. And I think to make sure that your child has, especially if it's a trained professional, to speak to about it is really the best thing you can do. And one of the things that I learned in therapy is that I'm likely going to have a, a level of OCD for my entire life. It's rare that you go from having tendencies to zero. I've heard of people that like it can go from a 50 down to a 5, in terms of like really reducing what it looks like. And some of those people it was when they were on medication. So that's what really kind of like, I go back and forth about potentially trying out those medications sometime soon. But even in the best case scenarios that I've at least heard, you still, kind of have like little specks of it ingrained in you. But, it kind of makes it all the more manageable. I think one of the last things that I'll say on it too is like, sometimes it's really a double-edged sword where because it's manageable and you're functional and you can still do things at a high level with it, you kind of normalize it. I highly recommend, if you're listening or watching this right now, to not approach it like that, because I think I made that mistake where my whole life I've been able to function and operate, not always address the fact that I had OCD. And because I was able to be functional and operate, I just kind of accepted it for what it was. But I was really doing myself a disservice because I wasn't optimizing my happiness or my life. And I think that even doing a podcast like this today is one step in that direction. Talking about it in therapy is another step in that direction. Talking about it with my partner is another step in that direction. Trying to be more open about it when I talk about it with my parents or friends, and really trying to actually do the steps and, do more of the 7s, 8s, and 9s on the discomfort scale, are all things that have really, really helped me. Finally, OCD is not the worst thing in the world. There's wars right now. There's suffering. There's a lot of hardship in the world. And so for anybody, I think it's really important to put that into perspective. I know what you're probably thinking. Two things, just because there's wars doesn't mean you can't improve your OCD. I agree. Two things can be true at the same time. But I think it's important, especially for this younger generation, to instead of feel bad for themselves about what they're going through, take some time to sit with it, analyze it, speak about it, and improve it, and also put it into perspective, right? I'm lucky enough that even with this thing that I have that I'm going to continue to work on and improve, I'm able to have a very amazing life and be happy and have a romantic partner and grow my business and grow my brand, right? And so I need to also remind myself I can do all those things, but that's not a reason not to work on it. And it's not a reason to not address it. So I hope this episode was helpful. I know sometimes I rambled. By the way, I think I'm ADHD, if that we can throw that one in there. But yeah, I think it's this weird kind of thing. And in a weird way, it kind of feels like sometimes you have to be secretive about it because you don't want to make the thing a thing. But I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I think that the more you can talk about it, think about it, do the things that make you uncomfortable, work on it, life gets better. And I'm going to keep you guys in the loop on my progress. This is nice too because it kind of reminds me of what I need to be doing to improve my life. And this is one of those aspects. But I've enjoyed today. So in the future, I'm going to be doing more solo episodes. If there's other specific topics you'd like me to touch on, I will. This was one that I think, I've been sitting on for a little while to get into because I had kind of talked about it a little bit. People around me know and can tell, but never really done a deep dive. So I hope it offers more perspective, and I hope that it offers more comfort to those that need it around this specific topic. I appreciate you all, as always. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching if you're watching. Thank you for listening if you're listening. And I will see you next week.